What happened in the congressional hearing room yesterday will be remembered as one of the most devastating political moments of the year. Senator Tommy Tuberville thought he could mock Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett's military knowledge with a laugh that would silence her forever. What he didn't expect was the letter from her veteran father that would completely destroy his reputation in front of the entire nation. The moment Tuberville let out that dismissive chuckle, thinking he had cornered the young Texas Congresswoman, everything changed. Crockett didn't just fight back. She unleashed a family secret that left the Alabama senator speechless and the entire room in complete shock. The confrontation had been building for months, with military families across America watching as their loved ones' careers were held hostage by political maneuvering. Promotion ceremonies were canceled, retirement plans disrupted, and military children faced uncertainty about their futures, all while politicians played games with their parents' careers. What made this moment even more explosive was that Tuberville had no idea what was coming. His intelligence about Crockett's background was completely wrong. His staff had focused on her legal career and political positions, but had completely missed the most important fact about her life. She was raised by a decorated combat veteran who had taught her everything about military service and sacrifice. Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss any of these explosive political moments that are reshaping American politics. Trust me, you're going to want to see how this plays out. This wasn't just another political argument. This was the moment when years of disrespect met decades of military service, and the results were absolutely devastating for Senator Tuberville. Senator Tommy Tuberville walked into that hearing room with the confidence of someone who thought he owned the place. At 69 years old, the former Auburn football coach turned Alabama senator has made a name for himself by taking on anyone who challenges conservative military policies. Known for his tough talk about supporting the troops, Tuberville has spent his Senate career positioning himself as the ultimate defender of military values. The senator's rise to political power had been built on his coaching reputation and his ability to connect with rural Alabama voters who appreciated his straight-talking style. His supporters saw him as someone who understood discipline and leadership from his decades on the sidelines, guiding young men through the pressures of college football. They believed this experience translated directly to understanding military culture and values. But there's something about Tuberville that his supporters often overlook. Despite all his military rhetoric, the senator himself never served in the armed forces. His entire understanding of military life comes from the sidelines, first as a football coach dealing with former military players, and now as a politician making decisions about people whose experiences he's never lived. Tuberville's confidence that morning came from months of successfully defending his controversial stance. He had weathered criticism from military families, veteran organizations, and even some members of his own party. In his mind, he was fighting for principles that mattered more than individual careers or personal convenience. He genuinely believed his football background gave him special insight into military discipline and sacrifice. On the other side of this confrontation sat Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, the 43-year-old Democrat from Texas, who has quickly become one of the most formidable voices in the House of Representatives. A former civil rights attorney with a sharp legal mind, Crockett has never backed down from a fight, especially when it comes to defending military families and veterans' rights. Crockett's political career had been built on her reputation as someone who did her homework and came prepared for battle. Her legal background had taught her to build cases methodically, gathering evidence and waiting for the right moment to present it with maximum impact. She had spent weeks preparing for this confrontation, knowing that Tuberville's dismissive attitude toward military families demanded a response. What most people in that room didn't know was that Crockett's passion for military issues runs deeper than politics. Her father, Master Sergeant James Crockett, served 3 tours of duty in Vietnam and spent 22 years in the Air Force before retiring with full honors. The lessons he taught her about service, sacrifice, and standing up for what's right shaped everything about who she became. Growing up as a military child had given Crockett perspectives that few politicians could claim. She understood the reality of military life, the constant moves, the deployments, the uncertainty, and the unique challenges facing military families. This wasn't theoretical knowledge gained from briefings or policy papers. It was lived experience passed down from father to daughter. The hearing was supposed to be a routine discussion about military spending and veteran benefits. But tensions had been building for weeks between Tuberville and several Democratic members over his controversial decision to hold up military promotions for months over abortion policies. Crockett had been one of his most vocal critics, arguing that his actions were hurting military families and weakening national security. What made this confrontation even more significant was the timing. Military families across the nation were dealing with unprecedented challenges. Base housing shortages had reached crisis levels in several states, with families living in substandard conditions while waiting for renovations that couldn't proceed without proper leadership in place. Military spouses were facing employment difficulties as frequent moves and deployment schedules made career stability nearly impossible. The promotion holds had created a cascading effect throughout the entire military structure. Senior officers who should have been advancing to positions where they could address these systemic issues were stuck in limbo. Junior officers were questioning whether military careers offered the stability and advancement opportunities they needed to support their families. The human cost of political maneuvering was becoming impossible to ignore. Military mental health resources were already stretched thin, and the uncertainty created by the promotion delays was adding additional stress to service members and their families. Counselors on military bases reported increased anxiety among personnel worried about their career prospects and financial security. The very people dedicated to protecting America's security were finding their own futures uncertain due to political games. The stakes couldn't have been higher. With military families across the country watching, this confrontation would determine who really stood with America's service members and who was just playing politics with their lives. The hearing room itself had become a symbol of this larger struggle, with gallery seats filled by military spouses, veterans, and family members who had traveled from across the region to witness this debate about their futures. The tension in the hearing room had been building all morning. Tuberville had already gotten into heated exchanges with 3 other Democratic representatives, each time using his folksy Alabama charm to deflect criticism while maintaining his hardline stance on military policies. The former coach seemed to be enjoying himself, treating the serious hearing like another game day where he could outmaneuver his opponents. The atmosphere was electric with barely contained hostility. Military families in the gallery watched intently, some wearing pins honoring their deployed loved ones, others holding photographs of service members affected by the promotion delays. These weren't just political observers. They were people whose lives had been directly impacted by the senator's decisions. Earlier in the morning, Tuberville had dismissed concerns from Representative Martinez about delayed medical benefits for military spouses, joking that military wives are tougher than most folks think. When Representative Johnson questioned the impact on military children's education, Tuberville had waved off the concern with a comment about how moving around builds character. Each dismissive response had increased the tension in the room. Behind the scenes, Crockett's staff had been working frantically all week to prepare for this moment. They had compiled dozens of stories from military families affected by Tuberville's holds, documented cases where career officers were considering leaving the service due to uncertainty, and gathered statistics showing the real-world impact of the political standoff. But none of that preparation would matter as much as the letter her father had written the night before. When Congresswoman Crockett's turn came to question the senator, she started with a measured tone, asking about the practical impact of his military promotion holds on service members and their families. Her questions were precise, legal in their structure, and clearly came from someone who had done her homework. "Senator Tuberville," Crockett began, her voice steady but firm, "can you explain to the military families watching at home why their loved ones are being denied promotions because of your personal political agenda?" The question cut straight to the heart of the issue, bypassing political niceties and demanding concrete answers about real-world consequences. Military families had been asking this same question for months through letters, phone calls, and social media posts that had largely been ignored by the senator's office. Behind Crockett's measured tone was months of preparation and research. Her staff had compiled hundreds of personal stories from military families affected by the promotion delays. There was the Air Force colonel whose retirement ceremony had to be postponed because his replacement couldn't be promoted. The Navy commander whose family had to delay buying a house because they weren't sure if his expected promotion and transfer would go through. The Army captain whose wife had turned down a job opportunity because they didn't know if they'd be staying at their current base. These weren't abstract policy debates. They were real disruptions to real families who had already sacrificed so much for their country. Crockett had studied every case file, memorized the statistics, and understood the human cost in ways that her legal training had prepared her to articulate clearly and powerfully. Tuberville leaned back in his chair, that familiar smirk spreading across his face. "Well, Congresswoman," he drawled, "I appreciate your concern, but I'm not sure someone who's never been around military folks would understand the complex decisions we have to make here." The room went quiet. Several people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Crockett's expression didn't change, but those who knew her could see the flash of something dangerous in her eyes. "I'm sorry, Senator," she replied, her voice still controlled. "But are you suggesting that I don't understand military issues?" Tuberville's grin widened. He was clearly enjoying this moment, thinking he had found her weak spot. "I'm just saying, Congresswoman, that coaching young men, including plenty of former military, gives you a certain perspective on what real service looks like. Some folks talk about supporting the troops, but they've never actually been in the trenches with them." A few Republicans in the room chuckled quietly. Tuberville was playing to his base, using his coaching background to establish credibility while subtly undermining Crockett's authority to speak on military matters. But Crockett wasn't backing down. "Senator Tuberville, with all due respect, coaching football is not the same as serving in combat, and making decisions that hurt military families isn't supporting the troops. It's using them as political pawns." The temperature in the room rose noticeably. Tuberville's face flushed slightly, his good old boy demeanor starting to crack. "Now hold on there, Congresswoman. I've spent my whole career around warriors, real warriors. Maybe if you spent less time in courtrooms and more time with actual service members, you'd understand what we're dealing with here." That's when it happened. Tuberville let out a dismissive laugh, not a chuckle, but a full, mocking laugh that echoed through the chamber. It was the kind of laugh that said, "This little lawyer thinks she can lecture me about military matters." The laugh that would haunt him for months to come. "Something funny, Senator?" Crockett's voice had changed. The measured legal tone was gone, replaced by something sharper, more personal. Tuberville was still smiling, completely unaware that he had just made the biggest mistake of his political career. "I'm just thinking about how some people like to talk tough about military policy when they wouldn't last 5 minutes in the real world where these decisions matter." The room was electric now. Other Democrats were sitting forward in their chairs, sensing that something big was about to happen. Republicans looked confused, not sure if their colleague was winning or walking into a trap. Crockett stood up slowly, reaching into her folder. "Senator Tuberville, since you find my military knowledge so amusing, I'd like to share something with you and everyone watching at home." She pulled out a sealed envelope, her hand steady despite the magnitude of the moment. "This morning, I received a letter from someone who actually knows what real military service looks like. Someone who spent 22 years defending this country while you were coaching football games." The weight of the moment was palpable. Staff members in the room stopped their note-taking and looked up, sensing that something historic was about to unfold. The court reporter's fingers hovered over the keys, ready to capture what would become one of the most significant exchanges in recent congressional history. In the gallery, military family members leaned forward in their seats. Gold Star mothers clutched photographs of their fallen sons and daughters, understanding that this moment represented more than just a political confrontation. It was about respect for their sacrifice and the service of their loved ones. Active duty spouses squeezed each other's hands, knowing that their experiences were about to be validated by someone who truly understood their struggles. The atmosphere in the room had completely transformed. What started as routine political theater had evolved into something much more profound and personal. Even the most cynical political observers present recognized they were witnessing something extraordinary, a moment when authentic moral authority was about to confront political posturing. Camera operators adjusted their equipment, instinctively understanding that they needed to capture every nuance of what was about to happen. The usual background chatter and shuffling of papers had ceased entirely, replaced by an expectant silence that seemed to stretch through the entire building. Tuberville's smile faltered for the first time. He had no idea what was coming, but something in Crockett's tone made him realize this wasn't going according to his plan. "This letter is from my father, Master Sergeant James Crockett, United States Air Force, retired. A man who served 3 tours in Vietnam, who earned a Bronze Star, and who taught me everything I know about what it really means to serve your country. The introduction alone carried tremendous impact. The mention of 3 Vietnam tours and a Bronze Star immediately established Master Sergeant Crockett's credentials beyond any possible challenge. These weren't political talking points or campaign rhetoric. They were the hard-earned distinctions of a career soldier who had proven his dedication to country through actual combat service. Several veterans in the gallery nodded in recognition and respect. They understood the significance of multiple Vietnam deployments, the weight of a Bronze Star citation, and the dedication required for a 22-year military career. They also understood that Master Sergeant Crockett had earned the right to speak about military service in ways that civilian politicians, regardless of their other accomplishments, simply had not. The room was dead silent now. Several people had their phones out, recording what was clearly about to be a historic moment. Tuberville sat frozen, his casual confidence completely evaporated. Crockett opened the envelope with deliberate care, her movements controlled and precise. The letter was handwritten on simple stationery, but everyone in the room understood they were about to witness something extraordinary. "Senator Tuberville," she began, her voice now carrying the weight of decades of military service. "My father wanted me to read this to you personally, since you seem to think I don't understand military matters." She unfolded the letter and began to read. "To Senator Tommy Tuberville, I am Master Sergeant James Crockett, retired United States Air Force, writing this letter through my daughter because your recent actions and comments have deeply insulted every service member and military family in this country." The impact was immediate. Tuberville's face went pale, and several Republicans shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This wasn't just political theater, this was personal, and it was devastating. Crockett continued reading, her father's words carrying across the chamber with the authority of someone who had earned the right to speak truth to power. "Senator, you laughed at my daughter's knowledge of military affairs. Let me tell you what she knows that you clearly don't. She knows that when you hold up military promotions, you're not making a political point. You're destroying careers that men and women have spent decades building. She knows that when military families can't get the promotions they've earned, their children suffer, their spouses struggle, and their service to this country becomes a burden instead of an honor." The room was absolutely silent except for Crockett's clear, strong voice reading her father's words. Even the cameras seemed to focus more intently, understanding that they were capturing something historic. "My daughter knows these things, Senator, because I taught her. I taught her by coming home from 3 tours in Vietnam with stories about the brothers I lost and the friends I buried. I taught her by explaining why we serve, not for politicians who play games with our lives, but for the idea that America is worth fighting for." Tuberville tried to interrupt, raising his hand slightly, but Crockett kept reading, her father's voice speaking through her with unstoppable momentum. "Senator Tuberville, you coached football for 30 years, and I respect that. But coaching young men to play a game is not the same as leading young men into combat. It's not the same as holding a dying soldier in your arms. It's not the same as writing letters to mothers who will never see their sons come home." The emotional impact was devastating. Several people in the gallery had tears in their eyes, and even some of the hardened political veterans in the room looked deeply moved. Tuberville sat motionless, completely unable to respond to the raw power of these words. "You want to know what real military knowledge looks like, Senator? It looks like understanding that every promotion you block represents a family's future. Every delay you cause ripples through communities across this country. Every political game you play with military policy affects real people who have already sacrificed more than you can imagine." Crockett's voice grew stronger as she read the letter's climax. "My daughter doesn't just understand military issues because she studied them or because she's met with veterans. She understands them because she grew up in a military family. She understands them because she watched her mother worry every day for 22 years whether her husband would come home safe. She understands them because she lived with the reality of military life while you were drawing plays on a chalkboard." The silence in the room was deafening. Tuberville looked like he wanted to disappear entirely. His earlier confidence and mocking laughter seemed like they had happened in another lifetime. But Master Sergeant Crockett wasn't finished. "Senator, you laughed at my daughter's military knowledge. That laugh was an insult not just to her, but to every military family in America. It was an insult to every veteran who has fought for your right to sit in that chair, and it was an insult to every service member currently putting their life on the line while you play politics with their careers. Crockett paused, looking directly at Tuberville before reading the final paragraph. My daughter has more understanding of military sacrifice in her little finger than you have developed in your entire political career. She doesn't just talk about supporting the troops, she fights for policies that actually help them. She doesn't just use military families as political props. She works to solve their real problems. So the next time you want to laugh at someone's military knowledge, Senator, remember that some of us earned our understanding through blood, sweat, and sacrifice, not through coaching football and making political speeches. The letter was signed simply, Master Sergeant James Crockett, United States Air Force, retired. Proud father of Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. The final line carried particular weight, not just as a signature but as a declaration of pride from a veteran father in his daughter's service to the country. It was a reminder that military service takes many forms, and that those raised in military families carry forward the values of service and dedication in their own unique ways. The silence that followed was unlike anything anyone in that room had ever experienced. It wasn't just quiet. It was the kind of profound silence that comes when truth has been spoken with such power that no response is possible. In that moment, the usual calculations of political advantage and partisan positioning seemed meaningless. The letter had stripped away the veneer of political theater and exposed something much more fundamental: the difference between those who had earned the right to speak about military sacrifice through personal experience and those who simply assumed that right through political position. The emotional impact rippled through the room in waves. Military family members in the gallery sat with tears in their eyes, finally hearing their experiences and struggles articulated with the authority and dignity they deserved. Some clutched the hands of those sitting beside them, overwhelmed by the validation that Master Sergeant Crockett's words provided. Staff members from both parties sat transfixed, their usual note-taking and strategic thinking momentarily suspended by the raw authenticity of the moment. Even the most hardened political veterans present recognized they were witnessing something extraordinary, a moment when genuine moral authority cut through political noise with devastating clarity. The press gallery, usually buzzing with whispered commentary and analysis, had fallen completely silent. Veteran political reporters, accustomed to parsing every word for partisan advantage or strategic implication, found themselves simply listening to the voice of a father defending his daughter and, through her, all military families. Tuberville sat completely still, his face flushed red, his hands gripping the edge of the table. The man who had been so confident and dismissive just minutes earlier looked like he had been physically struck. His mouth opened slightly as if to speak, but no words came out. Other senators and representatives sat in stunned silence, many of them clearly moved by the raw emotional power of Master Sergeant Crockett's words. The usual political calculations and partisan considerations seemed meaningless in the face of such authentic moral authority. Crockett carefully folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. When she spoke again, her voice was quiet but carried absolute conviction. Senator Tuberville, my father wanted me to tell you that your laughter today was heard by military families across this country. They heard you dismiss the daughter of a Vietnam veteran. They heard you mock someone who has spent her entire career fighting for their rights and benefits. And they will remember. She sat down, the letter still in her hands, and looked directly at Tuberville. Do you have anything to say to my father, Senator? Any response to a man who actually served this country while you were coaching football? Tuberville finally managed to speak, his voice barely above a whisper. I have great respect for your father's service, Congresswoman. I never meant to. You never meant to what, Senator? Crockett's voice cut through his stammering. You never meant to laugh. You never meant to dismiss military families. You never meant to use your position to play politics with people's lives. The hearing room remained silent, waiting for Tuberville's response. But the senator had nothing left to say. The man who had entered the room with such confidence looked defeated, his political theater completely dismantled by the authentic voice of military service. The immediate aftermath of Crockett's devastating letter reading was unlike anything political observers had seen in recent memory. As the hearing officially ended and representatives began filing out, The room buzzed with whispered conversations about what they had just witnessed. Even seasoned political veterans, people who had seen decades of congressional theater, admitted they had never seen anything quite like Master Sergeant Crockett's letter. Tuberville left the hearing room without speaking to reporters, his usual post-hearing media availability mysteriously canceled. Staff members were seen hurrying after him, clearly trying to figure out how to respond to what had just happened. The senator, who had entered the room ready to mock and dismiss his opponents, had been completely silenced by the words of a Vietnam veteran. Within minutes of the hearing's conclusion, video clips of Crockett reading her father's letter began spreading across social media with unprecedented speed. The hashtag #Master Sergeant Crockett letter started trending almost immediately, with military families and veterans sharing their own stories of sacrifice and service. The most widely shared clip showed the exact moment when Tuberville's confident smile disappeared, replaced by the stunned realization that he had badly miscalculated. His dismissive laugh, which had seemed so clever in the moment, now looked cruel and ignorant when contrasted with Master Sergeant Crockett's powerful words about real military service. Military family support groups across the country began posting their reactions to the confrontation. Gold Star mothers shared the video with comments about how Master Sergeant Crockett's letter captured their own experiences with politicians who talked about supporting the troops but failed to understand their real needs. Active-duty military families posted about how Tuberville's promotion holds had actually affected their lives, giving concrete examples of the damage his political games had caused. Conservative military veterans found themselves in an uncomfortable position. Many had supported Tuberville's stance on various issues, but Master Sergeant Crockett's letter forced them to confront the difference between political posturing and actual service. Several prominent veteran organizations issued statements calling for more respectful dialogue about military issues and fewer political games with service members' careers. The mainstream media coverage was extensive and largely focused on the authentic emotion of the moment. Political commentators struggled to analyze the confrontation using their usual partisan frameworks because Master Sergeant Crockett's letter transcended typical political categories. This wasn't about Democrat versus Republican. It was about authentic military service versus political theater. Major newspapers ran extensive profiles of Master Sergeant James Crockett, detailing his 3 tours in Vietnam, his Bronze Star citation, and his 22 years of distinguished service. The contrast between his record and Tuberville's civilian background became impossible to ignore, especially given the senator's habit of positioning himself as a military expert. Television news programs played the letter reading extensively, often without commentary, letting Master Sergeant Crockett's words speak for themselves. The emotional impact was so powerful that even political opponents found it difficult to criticize Crockett's response to Tuberville's dismissive laughter. International media picked up the story as well, with foreign correspondents noting how the confrontation highlighted broader tensions in American politics about who has the moral authority to speak about military issues. The image of Tuberville's shocked silence after being confronted with authentic military service became a symbol of political privilege being challenged by real-world experience. Social media analysis showed that the video of Crockett reading her father's letter reached millions of views within the first 24 hours, with engagement rates far higher than typical political content. The comments sections were filled with military families sharing their own stories and thanking both Jasmine and Master Sergeant Crockett for giving voice to their experiences. Military spouse groups organized online campaigns to share the letter, with many noting that Master Sergeant Crockett's words about the impact of political games on military families perfectly captured their own struggles with politicians who claimed to support the troops while making their lives more difficult. The political implications extended far beyond the immediate confrontation. Tuberville, who had built much of his political brand around military issues despite never serving himself, found his credibility severely damaged. Military families who had previously supported him began questioning whether he truly understood their needs or was simply using them for political advantage. Democratic strategists recognized that Crockett had achieved something rare in modern politics, a moment of authentic moral clarity that transcended partisan divisions. Her father's letter provided a template for how to challenge political opponents not through personal attacks or partisan talking points, but through genuine moral authority earned through service and sacrifice. Republican strategists, meanwhile, struggled to find an effective response. How do you attack a Vietnam veteran's letter to his daughter? How do you defend laughing at the military knowledge of someone raised in a military family? The usual political counterpunches seemed inadequate in the face of such authentic moral authority. Polling data released in the weeks following the confrontation showed significant shifts in public opinion about military issues and political authenticity. Voters expressed increased skepticism about politicians who talked tough about military matters without having served themselves, and increased respect for political figures who had genuine connections to military service. Military recruitment centers reported increased interest from young people who said they were inspired by Master Sergeant Crockett's example of service and his daughter's willingness to fight for military families. The letter had reminded many Americans of the values that military service represents and the importance of having authentic voices advocating for service members. The long-term political consequences continued to unfold over the following months. Tuberville found himself increasingly isolated on military issues, with even some Republican colleagues distancing themselves from his more controversial positions. His holds on military promotions, which had seemed like clever political maneuvering before the confrontation, now looked petty and harmful in light of Master Sergeant Crockett's letter. Crockett, meanwhile, saw her influence on military and veterans issues grow significantly. Military family advocacy groups began reaching out to her office more frequently, seeing her as someone who truly understood their concerns. Her father's letter had established her as not just a political advocate, but as someone with genuine moral authority to speak about military issues. The confrontation also sparked broader conversations about the nature of political expertise and moral authority in American democracy. Master Sergeant Crockett's letter had demonstrated that real-world experience and authentic service carried more weight than political positioning and rhetorical skills. Veterans advocacy groups seized on the moment to launch broader initiatives, highlighting the difference between politicians who talked about military issues and those who truly understood them. The letter became a rallying cry for more authentic representation of military voices in political discourse. Several retired military officers penned op-eds in major publications, drawing parallels between Master Sergeant Crockett's service and the current generation of politicians making military policy. These pieces highlighted a growing concern in military communities about the disconnect between political rhetoric and lived military experience. The confrontation inspired a new generation of military family members to consider public service themselves. Young people from military backgrounds reported feeling motivated by Crockett's example to pursue careers in politics, public policy, and advocacy, seeing how authentic military experience could cut through political noise. Educational institutions began using the confrontation as a case study in effective political communication, noting how authentic personal experience could be more powerful than traditional political tactics. The letter reading became a template for how to respond to political attacks with moral authority rather than partisan counterattacks. As time passed, the confrontation between Tuberville and Crockett came to symbolize larger tensions in American politics between authentic service and political posturing, between genuine understanding and surface-level expertise, between moral authority and political power. The ripple effects extended into military communities worldwide. American service members stationed at overseas bases shared the video with their families, many reporting that Master Sergeant Crockett's letter helped them articulate their own frustrations with politicians who claimed to support the military while making their lives more difficult. Base commanders noted increased morale as service members felt their experiences were finally being recognized and validated at the highest levels of government. Military academies incorporated the confrontation into their leadership curricula, using it as an example of how authentic moral authority can overcome political maneuvering. Cadets and midshipmen studied the exchange as a lesson in standing up for principles and the power of earned credibility versus assumed authority. The letter became required reading in several military ethics courses. International military partners and allies took notice as well. Foreign military attachés reported that their own service members were sharing the video, seeing it as an example of American military values being properly defended. The confrontation reinforced respect for the U.S. military culture among international partners who had sometimes questioned American political commitment to service members. The moment also sparked important conversations within military families about civic engagement and political participation. Many military spouses who had previously avoided political involvement began attending town halls and contacting their representatives, inspired by how effectively Crockett had channeled her family's military experience into political advocacy. Veteran service organizations experienced a surge in membership and volunteerism following the confrontation. The letter had reminded many former service members of their continued obligation to advocate for current military families and active duty personnel. Local veteran groups organized letter-writing campaigns to elected officials, using Master Sergeant Crockett's example as a template for authentic military voices in political discourse. The lesson was clear. In an era of political theater and manufactured outrage, authentic voices speaking from genuine experience still held the power to cut through the noise and speak directly to the American people's sense of right and wrong. Master Sergeant Crockett's letter had reminded the country that some things, service, sacrifice, and moral courage, transcended political gamesmanship. For Tommy Tuberville, the laughter that seemed so clever in the moment became a defining mistake that highlighted the difference between talking about military service and actually understanding it. For Jasmine Crockett, her father's letter became a source of moral authority that elevated her voice on military issues far beyond her years in Congress. And for Master Sergeant James Crockett, his words defending his daughter became a reminder to the entire country about what real military service looks like and why it deserves respect rather than political manipulation. The story of that day in the hearing room became more than just another political confrontation. It became a testament to the power of authentic service and the importance of moral courage in American democracy. It showed that sometimes the most powerful political weapons aren't clever tactics or rhetorical skills, but simple truth spoken by those who have earned the right to speak it. Make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of these incredible political moments that are shaping our democracy. These confrontations between authentic service and political theater are defining our times, and you'll want to see every one of them as they happen. The battle for the soul of American politics is being fought in moments like these, and Master Sergeant Crockett's letter proves that truth and service still matter more than clever political games.